New York Giants, fun watching them this offseason on Hard Knocks and some of their offseason decisions. Big year for Joe Shane, big year for Brian Daboll. Giants coming off a 6-11 season after they made the playoffs in 2022, won a playoff game, but it all seemed fake, Sam. They won all the close games. It all seemed fake. They were supposed to be rebuilding. They overachieved in 22, regressed back in 23. What should we be expecting from the Giants here in 2024?
It sort of feels like this offseason, or this season for the Giants, it's about, like, can they get back to that level, you know? Because you're right, that was a mirage. They weren't supposed to be that good. And I honestly think beating the Vikings in the playoffs really derailed them, because I think that was the game that kind of made them believe. You know, up until then, I don't think they even believed that they were that much better than they expected to be. It's like they kind of knew that it wasn't real. And then they beat Minnesota in the playoffs. They're like, well, maybe we're actually really good. And then, no, you weren't. You're like, it wasn't real. You gave Daniel Jones the contract. You tried to have your cake and eat it with Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones. You got yourself into some bother and made some mistakes from a personnel standpoint. And now you're kind of trying to fix those and redress them. So Malik Nabers, I think, is huge. They're rookie to come in and try and act, okay, we're kind of, when you watch the Hard Knocks and all those things, you were sort of left with the impression of, we don't really have a way out of Daniel Jones. So, if we're stuck with Daniel Jones, let's try and make his life better, right? And that's where Malik Nabers comes in, and hopefully that's what they're going to get. But their sort of outlook for this season is, let's try and get back to where we were when we went on that run, made the playoffs, and surprised the team.
Biggest story for me, again, is the offensive line. And look, Daniel Jones, I think, is what he is at this point. I don't think he should be the punchline for jokes or anything like that. I mean, he's a serviceable, run the offense type of NFL starter. The problem with that is there's many of those around the NFL right now. There's many who are just better than Daniel Jones, more capable of carrying a team. And if you were just ranking the quarterbacks in a vacuum, what is he, 25? He's in the 20s somewhere. Not enough to make an impact. On the other hand, poor Daniel Jones, drafted in 2019, here we are in 2024, and there's not even a season that you could point to where it's like, yeah, the offensive line, pass protection was really good. He had these playmakers to throw to. I don't know if this is his best situation, but it probably is. I mean, it probably is at this point, isn't it? I mean, if Malik Nabers is the star that we think he can be, and just all the speed that they have at receiver now, with Darius Slayton coming back as a deep threat, Wan'Dale Robinson as a slot, Jalen Hyatt in his second year, his ability to stretch the field, and then creep back toward average on the offensive line, Sam. If they truly are going to put Jermaine Illuminor at right tackle, and they sign Greg Van Roten to play right guard, and John Runyon comes in to play left guard, just not having massive weaknesses along the offensive line, that looks like an upgrade. It's a creep back toward average type of move. Is this the best supporting cast we've ever seen for Daniel Jones? And I know that's not necessarily saying much.
Yeah, probably. And because of that, I think, you said we know what Daniel Jones is at this stage. I don't know that that's true, other than he clearly isn't, a transcendent quarterback, a guy that can overcome everything and, elevate the play of everybody around him and is sort of different in that regard. But I don't think we necessarily have nailed down what Daniel Jones can be in a functional offense with a decent supporting cast around him. He was drafted as a bit of a surprise at 6 overall, coming out of Duke. He was kind of a big play threat back then. Athletic, more athletic than you think. Big arm, capable of making all the throws. Danny Dimes, dropping passes deep down the field. And for his first couple of years in the league, his big-time throw rate, like, he made a ton of really big plays. And then the last few years, that just stopped. That just disappeared. And he almost overnight became one of the most big play-averse quarterbacks in football. Like, almost never dropped a dime anywhere. And he then became this sort of wildly conservative quarterback who was a big part of the designed run game. Again, more than you think he should be, would still make mistakes. And maybe that's the one constant that we do know, is that Daniel Jones is prone to make more mistakes than, really high-level quarterbacks. But I sort of feel like if you give him Malik Nabers and suddenly that receiving core improves and an offensive line improves, and Brian Daboll's offense, we know, has a track record of being good, I feel like Daniel Jones could actually have a ceiling that is a lot higher than people are giving it credit for because of what's happened for the last few years. Like, I think, you might actually rediscover a version of Danny Dimes that suddenly starts to look like a really competent, dangerous, maybe not really high end, but like productive, above average quarterback.
So when we talk best case scenario for the Giants, that's what we're looking at in the range of outcomes. I will say this, one of my favorite stats of all time in 2022 when the Giants, won those games, won 11 games, go to the playoffs, Daniel Jones with the 20th most rushing yards in a season by a QB. And he did have that knack for 3, 4, 5 first downs a game that he was picking up with his legs, both on keepers, in the design running game, and scrambling. So, to me, best case scenario is, okay, Daniel Jones gets back to that. I don't know if he's ever going to be the big play threat that you're talking about, but Malik Nabers can sure get that out of him, at least give him the opportunities to make those big plays. So, if they have an interesting group of weapons as far as pass catchers go. I don't know if rookie tight end Theo Johnson out of Penn State he's got as good of a chance as anybody to start. He's also got some really good athleticism. So, they've got an intriguing group of playmakers. It's also a fascinating team-building decision at the running back position. Again, Hard Knocks breaking down. They had to step away from Saquon Barkley, doing something that we would say is analytically sound, not paying him all the money, and bringing in a Devin Singletary, who has familiarity with Brian Daboll, drafting a Tyrone Tracy, who I know you liked coming out of Purdue, Eric Gray coming in, in his second year as a late-round pick. Just, not spending a ton at the running back position and spending your resources for those playmakers to help Daniel Jones and for the offensive line upgrades that they needed to make.
Yeah, and the offensive line really is everything. Like, we know what happens when Daniel Jones has a very bad offensive line in front of him. I think he makes it look worse, which is why you almost got a bump every time somebody else came into the offense last season, whether it was Tyrod Taylor, whether it was Tommy Cutlets, whoever it is, it looked better than Daniel Jones because they're not necessarily making the offensive line look even worse than it was. I don't know that we know yet what happens to Daniel Jones if you put a good offensive line in front of him. And maybe good is too far. It's too much of a stretch for what they've added this offseason. But if they have successfully crept back toward average and that's just a solid unit in front of him, I genuinely think that the upside for Daniel Jones is actually quite impressive. And maybe we are talking about a surprise playoff team.
You're like a whole new man over here at Check the Mic, leaning, skewing positive and everything. We're all business here, Sam, because we have the information. We're preparing for the season. We're trying to give every team their due. But then you never know when a story like Tommy Cutlets is going to come out of nowhere, and we do 20-minute segments on him flipping cutlets in the parking lot, That's the stuff you just can't anticipate. You can't predict that in these preview shows. Going back, defensive side of the ball, because I want to go back to this best-case scenario. The aggressive, often crazy scheme of Wink Martindale out the door for the Giants defense. Shane Bowen comes in from the Tennessee Titans. It's going to be completely different. We're talking about a Giants team that was pretty thin at corner last year. They drafted Deonte Banks in the first round. He was probably their top corner, and they're just throwing those dudes out on islands. It was part of, that high variance type of defense was part of what made things work in 2022, and it was part of what led to some struggles in 2023. So heading into this year with this group, Shane Bowen's going to play a lot more zone, a lot more too high, a little bit less pressure on the corners, more pressure on the front four. It's an interesting front four with Brian Burns coming in, though. Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and, of course, the guy that we talk up as much as any player other than Aaron Donald on this show over the last couple of years, Dexter Lawrence, pushing the pocket from the middle. What are your thoughts on the Giants' defense? Because I think part of the best-case scenario is this group relies on those pass rushers and they cause some havoc up front.
Yeah, anytime you're shifting scheme that dramatically, it's going to be fascinating to watch. But also, I do really like that defensive front now, or at least I want to see how that group does. Dexter Lawrence is incredible. Brian Burns is a consistent pass rusher and a consistent sack artist. And then Kayvon Thibodeau, I don't think that he got better year two, even if his numbers in certain areas did. I think generally he was a little bit of a disappointment relative to what maybe he was expected to become. But now he's got less attention on him, right? Brian Burns is going to take some of that attention. And Dexter Lawrence has already taken a ton of the attention in the middle. So it should be easier for Kayvon Thibodeau this year to take a step forward, and maybe year 3 is the year for him. So I do think that that's a group that can definitely cause some problems, and then we'll see what the back end is capable of doing with some reinforcements. Andrew Phillips in the draft, and with a scheme that isn't as aggressive and as doesn't ask as much of them on the back end.
Same show, different name. Sacks are overrated, Sam. I don't care if Thibodeau had 11.5 sacks last year by the NFL's numbers. He had fewer quick wins. Still believe in the PFF grading for pass rushers. His PFF pass rushing grade went down last year, and that's encapsulating. Is he winning one-on-ones? Is he winning quickly? Is he causing havoc right off the snap? We didn't see that from Thibodeau in year 2. He did regress in the run game. So I think all the potential is there for Thibodeau. And again, I think a different system that features the front four a little bit more, could do him well. So I think part of the best case scenario includes the reliance on this defensive line to cause havoc, helping that secondary. Where do you think they can end up? Because again, we're trying to paint a rosy picture and then maybe a not so rosy picture. Like what is the ceiling here for this Giants team?
So the ceiling, I think, is, they surprise some people. Actually, Daniel Jones turns out is a better quarterback than people think when you put a decent situation around him. And I think they can, be a surprise playoff team. They can get back to where they were a couple of years ago when maybe it was fool's gold. The bad scenario, like the worst case scenario, is it turns out, even with all those upgrades, that what you said right away was actually the correct interpretation. We know what Daniel Jones is, and that is just not good. And Daniel Jones remains a not good quarterback, even with Malik Nabers and, a better offensive line and an improved situation around him. And remember, Hard Knocks, where they're asking Malik Nabers, like, how would he handle things not going great? It's like, I'd kind of find it, I'd have a tough time with that. Well, after 6 weeks of Daniel Jones just airmailing passes or firing them into the dirt, maybe Malik Nabers starts to get quite upset, and suddenly you've got a malcontent rookie wide receiver star on your hands. That's the worst case scenario.
Yeah, part of the worst case scenario for me is even though the corners will be relied upon less, Deonte Banks felt like a really good fit for Wink Martindale as a man coverage. I mean, just movement skills, 4.3 speed, just go cover this dude and, don't let him get away from you. That's Deonte Banks' game. I don't think he had as good of a feel playing in off coverage, playing in zone, and he looks like their top corner. I think cornerback 2, Cordell Flott, some injury issues with Andrew Phillips, the third-round pick that I know our friend Dan Brugler really liked. They have a lot of questions in that secondary. So I've got some questions for this defense. A lot of times in the NFL, just the new scheme does actually boost a team, but that's not a guarantee. So just bringing in Shane Bowen, switching the scheme, it's not a guaranteed, boost. And in the other Hard Knocks quote that sticks in my mind, they went to Bowen and said, you pretty much get one guy, right? Like with all of our defense, with all of our resources this offseason, it's going to O-line, it's going to receiver. Is right. Brian Burns enough? This is all you're getting on the defensive side, and from an upgrade standpoint, it really is all they got. I mean, look, they got the safety in the second round, Tyler Nubin. They got Andrew Phillips in the third, but we're talking about very much a similar roster last year, other than Brian Burns. So will that defense be enough? I think part of this worst case scenario is they're just not talented enough on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly was in terms of, veteran additions. They then added some rookies that could potentially move the needle. But, yeah, I mean, Brian Burns is supposed to be the guy that makes a difference on the defensive side. And then offensive side, the guy that's supposed to make the difference is Malik Nabers. Those are their 2 key players this offseason.
Is that who you're going with for the key players here for the Giants?
I mean, I think the key is
key player, key unit.
It's that combination. It's Daniel Jones to Malik Nabers. What does that look like? If Malik Nabers is actually able to make that kind of difference to the offense, have a Jamar Chase kind of impact, you add an elite receiver, suddenly the entire thing looks different, right? Joe Burrow rediscovered how to throw a deep ball as soon as Jamar Chase arrived in the building. T. Higgins, everybody looks like a superstar one step down the depth chart because suddenly you've got the number 1 guy who's able to dominate in all situations. If Malik Nabers is able to do that, and suddenly Danny Dimes shows back up instead of this guy that would throw, a big time throw every couple of weeks, that changes everything.
Daniel Jones, big time throws, just to add some context to what you're saying. From a percentage standpoint, 2021, 1.8% big time throw percentage. That's horrendous. I mean, the league average is about 3.5 to 4. He was at 1.8, 1.4% in 2022 when they made their playoff run, and then before he got hurt last year, just 2.4%. Historically, we've seen guys like Alex Smith, who were low big-time throw guys, low down-the-field passers. When they had that deep threat, boom, Tyreek Hill, they took those shots. Even Joe Burrow, his rookie season was one of the worst statistical deep passers in the NFL. You add Jamar Chase to the group, and all of a sudden he's one of the best. Nabers does have that ability.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, percentage is always a better way of, or a more fair way of showing the numbers. But sometimes, like, absolute numbers tell a better story. Daniel Jones had more big-time throws as a rookie than he's had in the last 3 seasons combined, right? So somewhere along the line, he just stopped making those big throws. If Nabers is able to find that, if he's able to get it back, and the offensive line is definitely a part of this as well. Like, the line is an impacting variable on big plays from quarterbacks. Like, if those upgrades rediscover a version of Daniel Jones that's actually capable of big plays in the passing game as well as the run game, the ceiling for this offense is a lot higher than people are giving it credit for.
Would you call him, your favorite phrase, pathologically conservative, Sam, to this point?
No, because I've seen him not be that before. Like, Alex Smith
right.
was that because, he was always that way. Daniel Jones hasn't always been that way.
All right, key players and key unit for me, again, I mean, Nabers really is, I think, the most important player, just to say, hey, is he going to add some level of explosiveness to this offense? But it almost doesn't matter if the O-line's not better. So the offseason additions of John Runyon, Jermaine Illuminor, Greg Van Roten, a very much creep back toward average type of strategy. Second year of John Michael Schmitz, their second-round center, who really struggled as a rookie. I loved him coming out of Minnesota. He looked just overwhelmed at the point of attack way too often last year. To me, it's the offensive line. I mean, if they're not going to be better, especially in pass protection, they're not going to have much success. So I think that's the key for the Giants this season.